Hello everyone, I'm John Safran and this is Alom Shaha, author of the Young Atheist Handbook, and we're just going to have like a chat for whatever and then you can ask questions and Alom can answer them. I should warn you, Alom, I'm in bad standing with the atheist community at the moment because I had you on the show, my Triple J show last night, but the week before we had Australia's leading ghost whisperer, and she'd written a book. And she can talk to people on the other side, so she claims. So I asked her, when the press release came through and we were talking to her, I said, oh, well, can you kind of try to talk to Christopher Hitchens on the other side? and see whether, what he has to say, and if he's there, does he regret his life now that obviously seen the light? And she did. She told me that she was walking around for 4 days, sort of communicating with Christopher Hitchens, and he was a bit confused about lying there in the light, considering everything that had happened in his life, but he was okay. So, and if you think I'm joking about being in bad standing, I've got this here because I want to read you out an email from an atheist. I guess you may hear angry rants regularly, so I'll keep it brief. I just felt the need to let you know that employing a crackpot ghost whisperer to speak to the spirit of Christopher Hitchens is a disgrace. I won't listen to your show nor watch your television programs any further. P.S. I regret giving you a discount when you came into the shop I work in. So, yeah, just if there's any bombs thrown away, it's probably my fault. Anyway, tell us about the Young Atheist Handbook.
Okay, so it's a very misleading title for anyone who's looking to buy a handbook. There aren't any instructions in it, I'm afraid, and it's not necessarily for young people in the sense of 12-year-olds or whatever. My editor Julia is in the audience and she's going to be terribly embarrassed when I say this, but she really helped to make the book work, and it's down to her if it reads well at all. But it's the one thing we kind of slightly disagreed on, in fact, and because I think there was a sense that it wasn't a handbook and we don't just want young people buying it. So ignore the title, but I really wanted to write something for people who are new to atheism, and I think it's when you're around kind of in your early teens that you might first start suspecting that there isn't a God. So it was a book initially aimed at young people in that sense. But I also know that lots of people come to reject their religions later in life. So they're young atheists in a different sense, in that they're new to atheism, and I hope the book appeals to those people as well.
And it seems to get to the heart of the matter a bit about how maybe in America there's all these problems with, evangelical Christians in the government and trying to push policy, and evangelical Christians trying to put creationism in the science programs, whilst perhaps, in the UK or in Australia, the kind of toxic aspect of religion is more about families and enclaves and communities. I
have to be honest, I haven't experienced any toxicity from religion over here. You people are really weird. I arrived here, and the first time I opened my email, there's an email from a reverend in Darwin saying, I've heard you're here. Would you mind coming to my church and talking about your book to my congregation to let them think about stuff outside the narrow little boxes they occupy? And that's a priest. And then I was in Perth at the Writers' Festival. Another priest, who is also an RE teacher at a school, comes to say hello. He's sitting on a panel with me. We're going to have a bit of a fight, I think. And he says, I've read your book. I don't really disagree with anything you say. And then he sat through the whole panel session, and every time someone from the audience kind of asked a question, he held up my book and said, you should really read Alom's book. Now, I don't know if this is my publishers doing a fantastic job of kind of paying people off, but I've just been overwhelmed by the niceness of you guys.
Yeah, but they're Christians. They like your book because they think you're going to pull the Muslims away from Islam, become atheists, and then they'll take over from there.
Right.
Have you had any fights with any of the other atheists? Because I spoke to Alain de Botton. He told me that him and Dawkins, don't really get on.
I'm slightly jealous that you didn't do a funny pronunciation of my name. It's also foreign.
Oh, yeah, okay. No, I'm happy to be more racist.
Right,
but,
I'm not going to get into any fights with any of the other atheists because I feel they're all like grown-ups. You know, they're scary academic types who are probably, you know, far smarter than me. But everybody's asking, like, what do you think of Dawkins? You know, Dawkins is a great intellect. We mustn't forget that Dawkins wrote The Selfish Gene, which will be remembered in hundreds of years' time as a book that redefined the way we think about biology. You know, we mustn't forget that he's known for the God delusion, but actually what he should be known for is the selfish gene and the stuff he did as a biologist. My book is very different to the God delusion. I think the God delusion puts a very strong list of arguments against the existence of God in a particular way, and I'm not really out to convert people. I'm trying to write something for people already kind of just doubting the existence of God, and to help them come to terms with that. I think it's quite scary when you first, if you grow up in a religious community, I think it's quite scary when you first start to doubt the existence of God, especially in certain types of community where it seems everybody around you believes in God and you must believe in God to be part of that community. And I wanted to write something that might comfort those people. So that's the aim of my book. It's not to convert people as such.
And what bridges have you burnt with people in your community?
I think the first signs are starting to show. My closest friends haven't had a problem with it. The guys I play poker with, they've all read it, and one of them, he said the only criticism he had was that he didn't think I got across what the good things were about being Bangladeshi, and I think that might be a valid criticism. But his sister-in-law saw him ordering copies of my book on Amazon, and she's like, why are you doing that? You shouldn't do that. And he's like, it's Alom's book, I'm going to buy some. And she's like, well, it's anti-Islamic, and you shouldn't do it. And this is a woman who's been in the same social circles as me, knows me personally. She hasn't read the book, and you know that depresses me slightly, that she's made a judgment despite knowing me personally, and despite not having read the book. So I suspect other people will respond similarly. And
what about extended family? Anything? Have you been burnt in any way?
No, unfortunately not. Fortunately not. I don't tend to go in for physical punishment. Unlike you, I understand you crucified yourself.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I got crucified.
Right.
I didn't. It's hard to do the second hand once
right,
you do the first one. But yes. No. Yeah. That was I guess a bit of a similar thing. And playing out in the real world what this book is.
Were you looking to get beaten up?
Pardon?
Were you trying to get beaten up?
No. I don't know. You know, it kind of looked good on paper.
Right.
And, you know, had a good story arc on paper, and then the next thing you know...
Did you die?
No, I didn't die. But the thing is, people doubt it because there's no holes in my hands. But the thing is, even though the nail's really fat, like the thing that tears your skin is really thin. So what happens is the nail goes in and pierces through the hand, but then it kind of stretches the skin without breaking it, if that makes any sense. So then when they pull it out, it just kind of springs back the thing, and that's why there's no holes in my hands. Thanks for asking.
No, that's really interesting because, you know, the story of doubting Thomas and Jesus had wounds, and you're saying you don't really have spectacular wounds.
No, they kind of, yeah.
So have we found another flaw in the Bible?
Yes,
right, okay.
Exactly. Now, are you worried that racists or Islamophobes will like take your book and kind of go, you know?
Yeah, actually, that was one of my concerns. And when I spoke to the UK publishers, I said I didn't want to be presented to the media as a kind of Uncle Tom figure, as someone who was kind of out to slate Islam, and I don't think the book does that. And I actually think anyone who's going to try and make me out to be that person is going to have to struggle to look through the book to find something they can use to say, you know, this guy's anti-Islamic, because I don't think I am anti-Islamic.
Because there's a bit of a publishing scene in America where former Muslims sort of go on the neocon circuit selling their books.
Is there lots of money to be made?
Oh, I don't, probably.
Okay.
I remember I interviewed this guy, Walid Shubat, and that's his entire shtick. He's like, I was Muslim, and then I realised how wrong it was. And he doesn't wait till the very end till he talks about how he kind of became an evangelical Christian and stuff.
He went from Islam to Christianity. Okay.
Yes.
No, I think that's disingenuous. I think... for me, it wasn't about rejecting Islam specifically. It was about rejecting the idea of God, and the role that religion should or should not play in my life. I think, you know, God is a story that we're told as young children. It's this idea that we're exposed to from a very young age. So I think at some point I must have believed in God. When I was very young, and, you know, Mum and Dad must have said, there's this man in the sky who's going to punish you if you do such and such, and I did lots of such and such. I must have at some point believed in God, but gradually that just didn't make sense to me. And so I don't think it would have mattered if I was in a Christian family or a Jewish family or whatever. I think it's the rejection of God that I'm talking about, not specifically the rejection of Islam.
And do you know the Quran well?
Not particularly. I try, you know, unlike lots of so-called Muslims, I have tried reading it. And I say tried reading it because I haven't read it from cover to cover. It's a really difficult read in English. I've read the English translation, and as a child, actually, I did read it. I read it in Arabic. But there's something peculiar that some of you may know. If you grow up in a Muslim community which is non-Arabic speaking, you're still made to read the Quran in Arabic, but they kind of don't bother teach you what the words mean. So this is absolutely true. It's shocking to people who don't know this. We go to mosque and we learn how to recognize the symbols and sound out the words. But unlike learning Spanish, say, in high school, you're not taught the grammar or the meaning of words. So as a child, I could read Arabic. Like, you could put Arabic in front of me and I could sound out what it was saying. And I memorized lots of surahs, verses from the Quran and so forth. But I never knew what it meant. And that is so bizarre if you think about it. And kind of reminiscent of, you know, when Christianity was all done in Latin, I guess. You know, I think the Catholics still hold Mass in Latin. And there must be a bunch of people just sitting there listening to Latin and not really... And that's what my experience was. I sat in mosque and the Imam would spout stuff in Arabic. I had no idea what it meant.
And the reason I ask you that is because I want to know if this is true, because this Muslim told me this the other day, but I don't know. She said that in the Quran with the famous 72 virgins, the thing that's often left out is that they're chubby. And is that true? That like the Quran like promises you chubby 72 virgins, not just 72 virgins.
Not in the translation that I've read, but
okay. I'm glad I checked it out.
I think that, God, the whole 72 virgins thing is just like, would you really want 72 virgins? Wouldn't you want 72 sluts? I mean, just, you know, if you because it's really weird. Like, there's this obsession with sex. I read in a book. I quote this kind of Islamic scholar, and he says, you know, when you go to heaven, your erection will be eternal, and you will be presented with 72. And the translation is not clear. It's either virgins or maidens who will have kind of appetizing vaginas. And, you know, there's this real, you know, clearly when you get to heaven, you're going to have lots and lots of sex. And if that sex was just with virgins, you know, I don't know if you've had sex with a virgin, but sex with virgins is usually... You know, I'm guessing it's not as good as sex with people who are experienced, right? So I don't know if their virginity is somehow magically renewed in heaven, or you start off with we should stop not talking about it. I don't know.
When I was in the UK, I noticed that kind of renegade, real extreme Muslim scene. You know, with the guy with the hook hand. What's his name? Abu Hamza. Was far more public than like in Australia. Like, everyone seems to be more, you know, like more restrained here or whatever. Is that still going on in 2012?
I think the press has a tendency to report those kind of Muslims, and it's something I feel quite strongly about. I think, you know, we talk about Muslims as if they're this homogenous group, and they're not. You don't talk about Christians as if they're a one type of person, and Muslims are as diverse as Christians and Catholics and Jews. But the press rather depressingly chooses to focus on the extremists and the characters with whom they can kind of ridicule and make the rest of them. I'm not even going to use the phrase Muslim community, because there is no Muslim community. There's no one single Muslim community. Where I come from in England, you know, there are Muslims who are Somali, Muslims who are Ethiopian, Muslims who are Bangladeshi, and they all have a slightly different spin on it, as do the individuals in those communities. So I don't like talking about Muslims in general, but the press would like us to think that Muslims are this one group of people who are going to destroy the Western way of life and so forth. And Hamza obviously doesn't help.
What's the update for him? Because he was Was he arrested by the US government?
I have no idea, you know. He's kind of disappeared, and there's another guy, Abu Qatada or something, that we're all scared of and terrified of.
Because I interviewed them for this show I did, and then and I was saying all this inflammatory stuff, and this is when I put a fatwa on this guy, Rove McManus, who hosts this other show.
You put a fatwa on someone?
Well, I went to the Sharia court in the UK, and
right.
it's not Hamza, it's the other guy who used to run, or still does run, the Sharia court in the UK.
I think I know who you mean. I can't recall his name.
And anyway, so we got the footage back, and I was showing it to SBS, and they're just saying this wild, inflammatory stuff. And I'm going, oh, listen, don't worry about it. These guys are just like rent a quote. Like it's not like they're real like bad or whatever. Like just don't worry about it or whatever. So they kind of trusted me and put it to air. And then like about a month after it went to air, it was like these news reports, and like both of them had been arrested, like by the FBI for running terrorist camps in Yemen.
Sure.
So yeah, SBS didn't trust my calls after that.
I mean, I'm not saying these guys aren't potentially dangerous, but what I think is dangerous is spreading the idea that every Muslim is like this guy. Every Muslim wants to blow you up, and I think that is a message that emerged post 9/11. I have my own sad story about this. After the July 7th bombings in London. Something very noticeable was if you're a brown guy with a rucksack, you got a seat, like full carriage would empty. But it's true. And I have to confess, like even I started to be, you know, to be wary of guys with beards with rucksacks on the tube. It was, you know, and I shouldn't have. But I was on a train journey, sitting peacefully reading a book or something, and a guy sitting across from me. He's got a can of drink in his hand. He leans across and he's like, can I ask you something? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, looks me in the eyes and he says, why do you all hate us? And I kid you, like, my heart broke. I was just like, oh my God, like, that's how you think of us. And at that point, I didn't even consider myself a Muslim, but you know, I wasn't going to go into a deep discussion with him about my rejection of Islam or anything. But I just said, I was shocked, and I just said, we really don't. We really don't. And he sat back and seemed to accept that. But the way the media has responded to the world after 9/11, I think, has made lots of people hate not just Muslims but all brown people, because you look at a brown person and you just assume they're Muslim. In London, everyone I meet assumes I'm a Muslim from my name and from the colour of my skin. You know, they just assume it, and once they assume I'm a Muslim, they have a whole load of other ideas about what I might be like, and that's wrong, and that's why I think Islamophobia is as bad as racism, in the same way that when I was young I would be judged as being inferior, really, because of the colour of my skin. I think Muslims around the world are now judged as being other, and that's really problematic.
And why do you think, if someone's in a religious community, whether it's Muslim or Scientologist or Jewish or whatever, that considering the outside world is pretty secular and free these days, that so many people find it difficult to break free?
I think the outside world in the West is kind of secular and so forth, but you know, when we talk about the West, you might include America in that, right? And yet, if you think about Middle America, you know, it's horrendously religious, and I mean horrendously. And why do people find it difficult to break out? In the Islamic context, it's because religion is central to their identity. And when you're born, you're told you're a Muslim, and that's a label that you're supposed to wear, and you're supposed to wear it with pride. And it's very difficult, I think, to remove the labels that are handed down to you by your parents and your community, and because you get all sorts of good things from belonging to a community. So by removing one of the labels that helps you identify with the community, it looks like you're rejecting that community. And I guess lots of people will probably feel that I'm rejecting the community that I grew up with, but I don't think anyone should feel compelled to remain part of a community or to cling to the identities that they had no choice about. I think actually one of the central messages of my book is that we can choose to be the people that we want to be, and that identity is fluid and not defined by other people. We can choose our own labels.
And is there anywhere in Britain where you can be a Muslim in a Muslim community, but it's kind of quasi-secular, and it's more like a cultural thing.
There's lots of places like that. The community I grew up with was a bit like that, but unfortunately, post 9/11, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Indians, Ethiopians, Somalis stopped thinking of themselves as Bangladeshis, Somalis, etc., and started thinking of themselves as Muslims, because that's the label the world slapped on them. You know, you're Muslims, and so I think 9/11 did lots of terrible things, but that was one of the most negative outcomes, that these people who had various identities kind of were forced to put their Muslim identity first and foremost. And that's what I want people to think about is, you know, is that an identity of your own choosing, or is it an identity that you carry around because it's just simply been stuck on you?
But does that mean, are you okay with, you know, someone being in wouldn't there be just like more benign Muslim communities where it's like mainly culture, and like what would you say to them if they say, oh yeah, I'm a Muslim, but they don't quite say it, but the invisible word is, you know, I'm a secular Muslim, or I'm a Muslim.
But those Muslims exist, they're real, we just don't hear about them.
Sure. But what I'm saying, are you saying to them, no, they should just even get out of identifying with it at all?
I think we should all be honest. I think if you don't really believe in God, then we should have that out in the open. I think one of the reasons why religion still plays such a big role in politics and culture and society is that not enough people are just honest about saying, actually, I don't believe in God. Except you Jewish people, because, like, Christ, I haven't met a Jewish Jew yet. You're all atheist Jews. Just like, what's that? Are there Jews that believe in God?
Not that I've met.
Right, yeah.
But that's why it's so strange where someone like converts to Judaism. Like, I'm just baffled by it. I'm wondering who they're going to hang out with when they start believing in the Jewish God. But because what about, you know, like Bosnian Muslims or something like that? Like they're kind of cultural, and then surely their Islam's a bit like Jewishness, if you know what I mean. Like it's more. I
don't know any Bosnian Muslims, but unfortunately, again, in their case, you know, they were forced to identify first and foremost as Muslims because of the war and stuff like that. And I think one of the problems with labels is that by definition they're divisive. If I wear a label that says I'm a Muslim and you wear one that says you're a Jew, then there's a wall between us. And God, I'm going to get really cheesy here for a moment, but I think that the label that we never talk about is human. But, you know, it's understood that we all have it, but it's the one label we never kind of embrace fully. And one of the things I liked about being a Muslim when I was a child, and that I like about being brown, is as a brown guy, if I walk into a shop that is run by other brown people, when they talk to you, it's like, so brother, what do you want? And brother this and brother that. And there's this idea that I'm a brother. And what makes me slightly sad about that is that, why is it I'm a brother just because I'm brown? Why am I not a brother because I'm a fellow human being? And it would be a wonderful world if we all called each other brother and sister. We couldn't have sex with each other, it would just all get a bit weird.
Does anyone want to ask any questions, just to throw in anything? Ooh. I think microphone... Ooh. I think he's flapping around a Quran.
There you go. Oh, no.
Appreciate it. That's okay. Thank you so much for the lecture. Hello everybody, my name is Leon, and appreciate it for explaining about the Quran. But I remind you of mine and memorize, you need more deep talk about Quran. Quran never not talk about sex, excuse me, and not talk about that. These are riwayat and hadith and imam and sharia law talk about this own opinion. I wish you more search about this stuff. I want to ask you one question, because you are my brother, you are atheist. I have no any problem by atheism. I'm from Middle East before I teach at the university, but I have no. I want to ask you, you talk about selfish gene. I love this stuff. Why we have a selfish gene and selfish gene? Why we have matter and antimatter? Thank you.
Okay, so you want a science lesson. Actually, if you haven't read The Selfish Gene, you should absolutely read it. And in the latest edition, in the foreword, Dawkins kind of explains why he almost regrets calling it The Selfish Gene. It's a really catchy title, but we understand the word selfish to mean something particular, and he uses it as a metaphor that has been widely misunderstood. But he used the metaphor of the selfish gene to explain how evolution happens and why certain genes are passed on and others aren't necessarily. Why we have matter and antimatter, I can explain that. When the universe... according to science, when the universe began in this thing that they call the Big Bang, there were two types of matter created, or which emerged, I would say, because created implies somebody made it. Two types of matter emerged, antimatter and matter, which are kind of opposite to each other in a very fundamental sense. And when those two types of matter collide, they annihilate each other. And so those two types of matter did in fact come into contact with each other at the start of the universe, and most of it disappeared, and we were left with what we know as matter, because there was a slight imbalance between the quantity of matter and antimatter produced immediately after the Big Bang. I can't tell you much more about it. You probably need to read somebody else's book.
Hi. Actually, in light of the previous question, it seems to me that a lot of atheists sort of need to rely on a scientific explanation to bolster their belief. I'm just wondering your thoughts on that and disengaging science from atheism.
I think I was an atheist long before I was a scientist. I think that, when I was very young, I didn't really start to enjoy science or even begin to understand what it was about until I was about 14 or 15. I think I had left God behind a long time before that. So science provides some really convincing answers to the big questions, like how we happen to get here. I think evolution, the theory of evolution by natural selection, is a fantastically detailed explanation of how, single-celled organisms eventually led to us. I think it's a wonderfully detailed and believable story. If you understand it, it's believable. So I don't think you need science to prop up your atheism, but what science does is provide alternative answers to those questions that, in many cases, religion used to answer for us.
Question I had, you made a very good point about Islamophobia and racism.
Yep.
Where do you think anti-theists, I think Sam Harris is probably most famous for criticising Islam, how do you think anti-theist criticism of Islam ties into Islamophobia and racism?
I suspect it does tie into Islamophobia. I would really like to think that I'm not an anti-theist. I think I have a great deal of empathy for people who believe in God, and I totally understand why you would believe in God. God is a great kind of source of comfort, a great explanation for things. If the idea of a God makes sense to you as an individual, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not anti-theistic like that. I am anti the influence of organised religion in politics. I am anti the kind of restrictions of freedom that certain religion groups would impose on citizens. So I think anti-theist implies anti-God. I'm going to say this because this is awful, but you can't be anti something that doesn't exist. I'm absolutely anti to oppressing people through the use of any ideology.
Hi. Speaking of oppression, so recently on the internet, there's been a lot of sort of kerfuffle about the atheism community being not very welcoming and being made up of mostly sort of white dudes and saying kind of misogynistic and racist things. I was just wondering if you wanted to comment on that and how to maybe make the community a bit more welcoming to sort of everyone.
I think that stuff that's happening on the internet is great because it highlights the fact that atheists aren't the rational, smart people that sometimes they think they are. Just coming out and saying I don't believe in God doesn't instantaneously make you smarter or more knowledgeable. And I think those discussions that you're talking about are evidence of that. So I write a lot online, and when you write online, you're supposed to engage with your writers through the comments and so forth. And I always try to do that. And I write sometimes for The Guardian, and the editor likes me to be around when the article goes live. And the only time I've had to phone him and say, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to step away from this one, was when I wrote about the fact that, you know, atheism was largely dominated by old white guys. And I wrote a really, God, you know, I'm so nice. I'm sorry, I bent over backwards to say, listen guys, I'm about to write something that some of you may misinterpret, but so don't read my article, go and read this article about the same thing by a white lesbian woman, you know, because she's saying the same thing. So I don't want you to think I'm saying this because I'm this brown guy with a chip on my shoulder. There's a white lesbian who's saying the same thing. So just go and read her article. But if you're not going to read that, you know, read what I'm saying. And I said, look, you know, it's not as easy for people who are not white middle class to be atheists. You know, if you're from certain types of communities, it's really hard to be out and out atheist for you know, a whole bunch of reasons. Those communities are different. We're not all the same. It's ridiculous to say, you know, we live in an equal society, so, you know, that brown guy can be an atheist as much as this white guy, or that girl can be as much of an atheist as this guy. You know, these differences between kind of race and gender are very real, and it's incredibly frustrating that people who reckon themselves to be smart don't understand privilege, and can't begin to empathise that actually life might be a bit harder if you're a woman, that life might be a bit harder if you're a black guy. So, you know what, I'm glad that discussion is happening, because I think we're forcing some of those people to look at that. But unfortunately, you know, I see the online discussions, and those atheists are as close-minded as the kind of people they're always bashing. This guy.
Hi. Following on from the white lesbians.
Yes.
Have you read Sheila Jeffrey's book called Man's Dominion, The Rise of Religion and the Eclipse of Women's Rights? So it's her latest book. She's arguing that there's lots of practices in religion that are you know, currently oppressing women, and just how a secular society should. I was wondering what you think about how a secular society should deal with when religion is kind of imposing on other rights that have been there, but now religion's asking for more rights. So they've been changing lots of laws, or the Vatican's trying to get in with the UN and do all these things. So, yeah, what's your take on that?
I think we defend secularism to the hilt. I think we become what recently in the British press we've been accused of being, which is militant. I think secularism is incredibly important, but we work with religious people, we work with religious secularists. It's secularism that allows Muslims and Christians and Jews to live side by side. Let's not forget that. You know, so I think we must separate secularism from atheism. And we must work with religious secularists. And as for all that stuff about, I haven't.
Maybe you can explain what a religious secularist is.
It's someone who believes in God, but doesn't think that religion or God plays any role in government or in how we conduct ourselves in society. So that's a religious secularist to me, and those people exist.
Now, when do you think atheists have won? And, like, for instance, to say the Anglicans in the UK, you know, you can't really compare them with, you know, the Hasidic settlers or with Shia Muslims in the Middle East or whatever. How soft do they have to get until you and Aline de Botton and Richard Dawkins will back away and just say, well, you know, I can live with this?
I think, I suspect we're a long way away from the kind of winning you described, but I'm hopeful that with greater equality of opportunity, with better provision of education, that the kind of religions that exist now will kind of evolve and change into more humanistic ones. I think I really hope the idea of organised religion dictating how societies work, I hope that will eventually disappear, and that's when people like me will have won. But I don't think we'll ever win in the sense that I don't think people will ever not believe in God. God is an incredibly powerful idea, and people will keep reinventing God. I tell you who I like, L. Ron Hubbard, you know? Like, he's just like... I'm honestly not being facetious here, but like Christianity and Islam, like basically versions 2 and 3 of Judaism, right? they're the same story told slightly differently with a different guy in charge. Whereas L. Ron Hubbard, he didn't cheat. He didn't just take the Old Testament and reinvent it. He just invented something from scratch, and you've got to hand it to him. More of those. Let's have more of those, I think.
Why do you think, even like in the West where we're modern, like esoteric religions are just so mainstream and just so popular? If you look at something like the Da Vinci Code, why is that just tapping into 90% of the mainstream population?
It's because I'm going to use another term that I think was coined by Dawkins, perhaps, a meme, which is an idea that infiltrates society, and the idea of God and religion are incredibly powerful memes. And the most powerful trick they have is, I think, something called belief in belief. So even though people don't, I have a suspicion lots of people don't actually believe in God, but they believe that it is a good thing if you do. So they think that there are people who believe in God and that those people are somehow better. And that believing in God is a good thing. So this idea, I think, is passed on from parents to children. And it's this passing on at that age when you have no ability to make any judgment about the ideas that are being put in front of you. That's why religion lingers to a large extent, that it's passed on to very young children. Whereas if you and I are now presented with ideas, we can kind of consciously evaluate them, but you don't evaluate the idea of God when it's first given to you. So I think that's what helps it linger so long.
And do you find that you often have to debate or have an argument, it's not so much with religious people, or as well as them, you have to argue with either atheists or agnostics who don't see the harm in religion? Because I think there's a lot of that in Australia where, just lots of people are agnostic, but they're like, Salvation Army's good, church is good, I've got nothing against religious schools.
In those particular instances, if you look at the Salvation Army or other religious organisations, it's usually you can usually kind of pick away at what they do and get to the heart of their agenda. And if the heart of their agenda is not to make the world a better place, but to convert people to Christianity or whatever, then you have to question the morality of that. I try not to argue with people, and I think it's very easy to point to the harm that religion does in the world. I'm not going to name names or anything, but there are plenty of societies out there where women are treated as second-class citizens on the basis of, the fact that their societies are run according to religious rules. I mean, the Catholic Church, for example, will not appoint women priests. How can that? Anyone who follows Catholicism claim that they are not sexist,
Sure.
Should we let this guy say something? Because
there's a lot of build-up now to this question.
Yes.
But, yeah.
That'll be good.
So it seems there's sort of an inherent disorganisation to atheism. Someone said it's like trying to herd cats together. Do you think that we need to be more organised as atheists in order to sort of fight the Christian or religious influence in politics? Do we have to get as organised and maybe go to an atheist church or an atheist white room with nothing in it or whatever to be able to sort of fight fire with fire and get as organised as what they are?
I think we need to get away from the dialogue around fighting and so forth. And I think what Alain de Botton wants to do is kind of interesting. I think one of the biggest things missing from atheism is kind of collective worship. Gathering together and kind of having moments together of togetherness. And I don't know how we address that, to be honest, because it would start feeling close to religion. I don't know. What do you think we should do?
Just go to church or synagogue and just don't believe in it.
Well, that's not an entirely bad idea, and I think there are lots of people who do that. I met a guy at the festival, Perth Writers Festival, and he said, my wife's a Christian, I go to church every Sunday, just to hang out with his wife, and I think that's sweet. So.
Hi, I think it's important to distinguish when you talk about the religious people between deist and the theist. and Dawkins sometimes called a pantheist. And you can explain a little bit further. And you sound like a little bit optimistic about the atheists winning, or, fight against the religions, but religious organization. I'm not so sure, because what's happening in Afghanistan at the moment, when someone burned the Quran, they just killed all the American soldiers or attempted to assassinate American kids. These things happen, and Australians who went to Saudi Arabia, and he was arrested for blasphemy, for criticizing Muhammad. And I don't know how, maybe we don't have to get there, but they will come to us. And I don't know, and also when you're talking about how it's so difficult to get out of religious confine, and I do believe that at the bottom of heart, it's a threat of violence, isn't it? If you're a Muslim and you try to get out of that sort of religious community, you are busted. It's a punishable death. I don't know how you can be so relaxed about fight against particularly religious organization, be it Islam or Christianity.
Because I'm not in Afghanistan, I'm not. I'm physically not in Afghanistan. There are lots of awful things that happen all over the world. And in order to win these battles, as I think you're putting them, it's a war of ideas. And what we have to spread is the idea that the world would be better without sexism, without blasphemy laws. And I think we can't do that by separating ourselves off as atheists who are somehow superior. We will win better rights for people around the world by joining with our religious brothers and sisters, with people who believe in human rights as being of fundamental importance.
But the problem is they don't really believe in human rights for everyone.
But they do. When you talk about religious people, you're encompassing everyone who believes in God. Let me just finish for a moment. There is not one homogeneous group of people who believe in God. Right? There are good people who believe in God. There are non-sexist, non-racist people who believe in God. And if we go down the road of saying us atheists are morally superior and we're the best and we know how to run the world, we're going to be in a minority first, and we will not win over hearts and minds like that.
Never claim the moral superiority.
But you are claiming moral superiority. We do claim moral superiority all the time. But actually that's fine. I think there are ways of looking at the world and running the world that are better, and we must not shy away from that. But we have to work through the spread of ideas, because we're not going to pick up guns and go to war. That's not what is going to happen. But what is happening, we live in an age where ideas can spread around the world. I'm sitting here talking to you in Australia, but just through the internet, I'm reaching people all around the world. And what has been particularly wonderful for me is Muslims in places where they can't be openly atheist are writing to me and saying, it's really great to know that there's others out there like you. It's a war of ideas. We need to spread ideas, and we do that, I think, through stories and creative arts and things like that far more powerfully than if we just go and shout in people's faces saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I don't want to do that.
Oh, hi. I was just wondering if it's possible, if some of the questionable and polarising Islamic rules, customs and conventions, including the Quranic intolerance towards a non-believer and the kuffar, may have pushed you towards atheism or consolidated your atheism?
That's a really good question. Yes, I think it did. A horrible story I will tell you from my youth. We arrived from Bangladesh to this very different country. Bangladesh in the 70s was very primitive. I lived in a mud hut, and then I lived in a house. And I met all these wonderful new kids. I went to school, and there was not a part of me that thought I can't play with the black kids or I can't play with the white kids. We all played together, and yet in mosque, the message that I think helped turn me off Islam at a very young age was that everyone who doesn't follow Islam is going to burn in hell, and that you shouldn't play with those kids. And that was a message, and that's not just an Islamic message. Catholic kids, I'm sure, get told that message, and I know Christians get told that message. It's a message that lots of people who don't really get it tell their kids, or lots of priests and imams and rabbis, I think, tell the communities that those who don't believe in the same religion as you are going to burn in hell. And as a child, that was just a vile, vile idea that my friends Chris and Peter and Andrew, white and black kids were going to burn in hell. And I didn't believe it. I thought you're talking shit. Like, these kids are not going to burn in hell. It doesn't make sense. And it seemed unjust. So as a young child, it kind of grated against my natural sense of fairness that, just because Andrew and Chris and Peter were not Muslims, that God, this all-powerful being, would make them burn in hell. Like, if you were God and powerful and stuff, wouldn't you just make them into Muslims? Right? And this is what I'm saying. I think children question religion. I think children see the ridiculousness of much of it, and yet there are these pressures brought to bear on them that mean that by the time they're grown up, they stop asking those questions.
An idea that you mentioned before to do with a secular kind of church that Alain de Botton talks about, and where he sort of does a little bit of a disparaging talk on Dawkins, saying that, you're missing out on some of the community that is developed in a religious community. As if, and Dawkins actually mentions this in his book and in other times, and I believe other atheists have as well. There are many secular institutions out there which develop community. They're called book clubs, they're called footy clubs, they're called dancing clubs. They don't have to revolve around the idea of there being a supernatural being or there not being a supernatural being. There doesn't need to be an atheist church, because there are many different institutions which fill that sense of community. And I see this as a bit of a meme, and I wonder from your perspective as being out there on the front lines, whether or not that idea has occurred to you as well, that you don't necessarily need this secular institution to fill the place of the church because they're already there.
Thank you, Warren, because no, that idea hadn't occurred to me. I think it might have been somewhere in the back of my mind, but you've articulated something very important, I think. I'm a school teacher, and one of the reasons I enjoy being a school teacher is that I'm part of a community. It's one of the best things about the job. I feel that there are all these other people, and we kind of are striving towards the same goal, and we have the same values, and it's kind of wonderful. And the dangers with kind of community, there are dangers which are, if as an individual you disagree with something the community believes, then suddenly it gets problematic. So I don't want to be a member of a community that insists that on rigid rules and regulations about what you think. So yeah, Warren, I think you're absolutely right. There are all sorts of other communities which we can be part of, and we don't need atheist churches or whatever. Absolutely.
I just had an observation, and perhaps you can reflect on. Critical thinking, I think, is important for the advancement of society generally, in terms of the way we interact as a society. And it seems to me that atheism is just a subset of critical thinking. It's critical thinking about one aspect of life, but there's lots of other aspects of life we can think about, alternative medicine or other. It's just a subset. Do you think about it like that? Is that a way that you would categorise it? So this is just a atheism being just being a small subset of a broader class of critical thinking, if you like, and you can apply the same kind of principles and procedures just to a particular topic about God.
Yes, I think critical thinking is important, and I think actually we should teach it explicitly in schools and not assume that critical thinking emerges magically after a general education, which is what I think we do in the UK. One of the reasons I enjoy being a science teacher is I think science is a subject which lends itself to the teaching of critical thinking. However, going back to what the young lady at the back said, we have to kind of avoid coming to the conclusion that all atheists are extremely good critical thinkers, because there is plenty of evidence that they're not. So yes, I think critical thinking is important and a really valuable tool to have to make sense of the world. And we should do everything we can to encourage it. And I think one of the consequences of having good critical thinkers out there is that there'd probably be less people who buy into the God hypothesis.
Hi, I guess my question is similar to another one that was just said. Do you see an emergence of community groups that don't associate with being necessarily atheist or agnostic or religious, and do you see a problem with this, that people are not associating with certain religions or certain beliefs, or there is or there isn't?
I'm terribly sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Sorry, I probably didn't articulate that very well.
No, that's okay. Do you mean people who don't believe in religion and don't buy into atheism either?
Yeah, and people who don't, I guess, associate as being agnostic either. Like, do you see a problem with people not, like, more sitting on the fence, I guess?
I see one problem with agnosticism, and I talk about it right at the start of the book. I mean, I say technically the book should be the Young Agnostics Handbook, but remember what I was saying about labels and identities and so forth? Well, we live in a world where, our identities are political as well as personal. And the reason why I call myself an atheist is because I think that is a word that now signifies certain types of beliefs, and it lets the world know where I'm standing. I think in order for us to win this war of ideas or whatever, I think we need to tell the world that we do not believe in God. And what agnostics seem to be saying is that, well, I don't believe in the God of the Bible, but I think there's something. And I think that's useless. I think by saying I think there might be something, you're not standing up against the ideas that are detrimental. So but by saying you're an atheist, I don't think you're kind of saying you're absolutely certain about the non-existence of God. I mean, I think it's almost a ridiculous position, agnosticism, to say that, and we can talk about the teapot that Russell talked about, or the flying spaghetti monster. I just think it's not a helpful position to occupy if we accept that we are engaged in a war of ideas. And actually, I feel that more people who don't believe in the gods of the major religions or any kind of god, and who just think there might be something, I think those people need to start calling themselves atheists, so that they come down firmly on the side of the people who are against the influence of theistic philosophies and religions, because that is the thing that is doing harm. The belief in God itself amongst individuals doesn't necessarily have to be harmful. It's when that belief is transformed into philosophy, or particularly political philosophies, that it starts to do harm. And by saying you're an atheist, you're signifying that you don't buy into any of that.
Do you have a problem with groups and ethnic groups or whatever else being broken up into little tribes if they don't believe in a supernatural God?
Sorry, what do you mean?
But, just say, do you think it's a problem if people in different communities and feel a bond and feel different from others, and all that rolls out from that, if a component of it isn't they believe in a supernatural God?
I think the biggest problem we have is feeling different from other people, and what we don't get enough of is experiences and encounters which let us experience our commonalities. God, it's going to sound.
But are you convinced that the reason people feel different and in different tribes is because they believe in different gods, as opposed to they have this urge to be tribal, and one of the expressions of that is to...
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are instinctively tribal creatures, yeah. But I think just as we have risen above many of our other instincts, that's part of the magic of being human, we should fight tribalism, yeah.
One here. Go ahead.
Hi, Alom. Just want to find your views on why you think atheism, or atheist as a term, has gotten more traction than, say, secularist or humanist.
That's a very good question, because I think the Young Atheist Handbook sounds sexier than the Young Secularist Handbook. I am a secularist and I am a humanist. So, I think atheist is slightly more provocative. So yeah, I'm being slightly facetious, but I think actually secularist and humanist are better terms, if I may say so. Are we going to have to change the title of the book?
Hi. Tonight we've touched on topics such as sexism, such as politics, and obviously atheism. I just want to know how you feel about this week. We've seen a fantastic period of Australian politics. I just want to know your position on,
I'm kind of disappointed by you. I thought you were going to say, I want to know about sports. Yeah, I'd say about politics. I think I've been following what's been happening, and it's a symptom of malaise in politics in the West in general. I think, democracy is this beautiful, wonderful idea, and it's in a mess because what we have is a political class, people who go into politics to be politicians. Definitely in the UK, we have people in Parliament who have done nothing but be politicians. They have no experience of working in industry or doing a job, and yet they make decisions about us ordinary people. And what I would love to see is more evidence-based policy making. I think there are real problems with kind of interest groups manipulating politicians to get what they want, and that shouldn't be happening. We should have kind of impartial politicians making decisions based on evidence. We should also have representative government. My cabinet is made up of predominantly privately educated white rich guys, who I don't think they can empathise with the problems of the ordinary person. I really don't. And I think we need to make politics more accessible to ordinary people as a career. I really wish that more doctors and nurses and teachers and bookstore owners would maybe go into politics at some stage in their life after they'd lived a bit. But instead we get these people who went into politics at university, they ran the student union, and then, these little upstart 24-year-old politicians who are wondering, God, I could get really, are we seriously letting these people run our worlds? We need to stop that everywhere, across the West. These ridiculous characters, this guy of yours who used to be Prime Minister, am I right?
Yes.
And in our country, at least, it's not as bad as, because in our country, once you used to be Prime Minister, the fact that you used to be Prime Minister signifies to you that people don't want you to be Prime Minister anymore, right? So they tend to disappear into the background and do charity work, apart from Blair, who has been blessed by God and is now on a mission for the Catholic. God, he thinks he's a prophet, doesn't he? I hate that guy with Atheists going out on video. I hate the kind of ego that guy has, and unfortunately that's what our politics and your politics seems to be full of. People driven by these huge personal egos. This guy, he was Prime Minister and now he wants to be Prime Minister or leader again, and he's lost again, right? Is he going to disappear this time?
No, probably not.
We need decent, ordinary people, smart, knowledgeable people, but decent people. And you know what is lacking in politics, I feel, is decency. And I guess decent people aren't attracted to politics, and we should change that. We should change that. We really should.
Now, we've probably got time for one more question, I think. Is that 7:15 we have to wrap? Is that right?
Well, my last question.
Cool. So do the last question.
Make it a good one, yeah. What's the meaning of life? No, I'm just kidding. I think concede to all your points throughout this conversation. Now, besides politics being, a mess, what I'm thinking about is that we've touched on the terms of secularism and humanism and atheism. Now, why can't we work with the people who, as you say, are religious secularists and just go for, what Sam Harris calls the conditions, primal conditions for human happiness and aversion to human suffering, and we can all work towards that instead of having a label saying we're atheists, we're against God, because that would actually, I think, provoke more people to be much more clinging to the idea which supports the idea of life, ideas of how to live and be.
I don't disagree with any of that. One of the things I talk about in my book is the identity labels that we wear. Identities, I'm brown, I'm a guy, I'm a teacher, I'm middle-aged. All these things are identity labels that I can wear at different times, and they come to the fore in different situations. And sometimes we are forced to wear those labels. So, for example, post 9/11, the people in my community were forced to identify as Muslims. The world looked at them as Muslims. They didn't have any choice. I feel that when I'm talking about these things, I'm going to be really honest and kind of stupid here and say that I want to change the world. Okay? And in order to change the world, I think I need to call myself an atheist in the context in which I want to change the world in this particular way. However, I also feel that I change the world as a science teacher. Okay, when I'm in the classroom, I'm Mr. Shaha, science teacher, and that label needs to be worn in that environment. So in certain environments, I need to label myself as an atheist, and I think that's what I mean by calling yourself an atheist is a political act in certain situations. But if we met in other circumstances, my being an atheist would not be the first thing that you would know about me.
Thank you very much, Alom, and everyone clap along.
Thank you.